hello everybody. My name is Jason McKenna, and I am a marketing and advertising executive with Times Union Hearst Media. Candy Marrero of Worksite Benefits is one of my clients, and I will be your MC for this event. And as such, I will first ask you all to please mute yourselves so that we are not hearing any extra noise while the panel speaks. Now, I will be taking questions from the audience, so please feel free to write them down in the chat box. Welcome to Reflection and Recovery. We were supposed to have 4 speakers today, but Anthony Accetta had a death in the family and will not be able to join us. Our thoughts and prayers go out to him and his family. This webinar is the first of many webinars that will be hosted by Candy and Worksite Benefits, so I will let her tell you about herself and then introduce her guests. Go ahead, Candy.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I appreciate that. I'm Candy Marrero. I own a small broker agency in Troy called Worksite Benefits. I have 5 employees and I've been doing health insurance for about 25 years. So what I'd like to say about my business is that we call ourselves a service agency because most broker agencies are truly sales agencies. So that's what differentiates us, I think, from the other broker agencies in the area. So we are happy to help everyone who needs assistance, and part of the reason for this today is just that, to reach out with an olive branch to anybody who might need some information on whether it's health insurance, whether it's payroll, or whether it's human resources. So we want to help you in every way that we can. So I will send it over to Rose Miller right now to talk about her business. Rose?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rose Miller. I'm the president of Pinnacle Human Resources. I'm a WBE with offices in Albany, New York and Syracuse, New York. We've been HR professionals for a very long time, working really closely with brokers like Candy and payroll providers like Jeannine. In our duties, we offer outsourced HR. So we've been very busy consulting with clients and addressing all their HR needs. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. Jeannine.
Thank you, Candy. My name is Jeannine Dubiac. I am a partner in Priority One Payroll. We are a full-service independent payroll service bureau, typically working with primarily small local businesses, mainly ranging in size from 1 to, say, 75 employee groups. And my main focus today is to be that resource for small local clients. So Jeannine Dubiac, Priority One Payroll.
Excellent. Well, my understanding is that the 3 of your industries overlap in much of what you all do. So I'd like to start out by asking you each to indicate how the pandemic has impacted you, the company, your staff, and of course your clients. Then you ladies will take it from there. We might go back and forth, not to stay on one person. Then I'll pop back at about 15 minutes before the end, and I will ask the panel questions from the audience. So if you're just joining us now, you can leave questions for any of the 3 people speaking today in the chat box below. Please note, if we can't get to all of them, we will send out a follow-up email with which will include all the questions and the answers and any pertinent correspondence. That being said, Candy, how has this pandemic impacted you?
Well, I think in a few different ways, as I'm sure it has everybody on the panel as well as everybody listening today. But for us, one of the main changes or the impacts, I guess, for our office specifically is, remote working. And, that changes the dynamics of everything, not just, the obvious. I mean, just not having somebody there to say, hey, can you help me? Can you do this? The person who's usually in your office not there, it's always that person that you need now. And now, calling them on the phone and them trying to do everything from home, it's, it's cumbersome, at least we found it to be. in addition to that, I think just all the extra calls that we get every day on questions, a lot of it pertaining to health insurance or benefits, but also so many questions that don't pertain to anything that we do, that just our clients rely on us for, asking us everything. They think we know all of, everything that they need, which we're glad we think that. But in general, it's been a lot of research trying to help them. We want them to call us. We then turn around and try to, scramble to figure out the answers for them, especially when it doesn't pertain to us so much. Things overlap with the gals on this panel with me. Our industries overlap a lot. So, people call me with HR questions, people call me with payroll questions, and that, that just takes up time for us. So we like to have them have the olive branch to the people who can, have those questions answered by them. And then the other big way it's impacted me personally is just the lack of seeing my clients, no appointments. I mean, I'm usually on the road, 4 out of 5 days, visiting with clients and doing open enrollments and, helping people with what they need. And they're used to that in-person service. So this, virtual world is a little new for us, but we've kind of got to get into it for that reason. So those are the 3 big ways I think it's affected me in my office. How about you, Rose?
Well, we were very fortunate to have a model already in place. The entire time we've been in business, we've had a remote workforce. So that we were very fortunate. We did not have to, a lot of clients had to put in infrastructure and didn't have, and had to navigate how to have a remote workforce. But that doesn't mean we weren't impacted. All the clients that their businesses were closed, and the ones that were essential and always open. I had frightened employees that had to go to essential businesses when the pandemic was at an all-time high, and how do I keep them safe? We had areas of the business, because they reduced all their on-site hours, they were closed, so that did impact that side of the business. But then on the flip side, just as you noted, we had uptick in employers that had questions. So we had to be responsive, and areas of the business that we also have, like leave management service, that went through the roof because of all the changes to the leave policies, and they were giving up trying to manage them all themselves. But probably the biggest way it impacted my company is the amount of education and concentration to keep up on the daily, not even monthly or weekly changes in the laws around the pandemic, that we were spending every waking moment keeping up so we could be the top professional and have the answers for our clients. And it was quite daunting. Someone should never underestimate how much it takes to keep up on all the recent changes. And me personally, I'm a social animal, so it killed me. It was like, Zoom is lovely, but it's not like being there. And I get energy from being around people, and being cut off from people was a real hardship. It continues to be a hardship for me. And how about you, Jeannine?
I feel very similar to Rose as far as the workflow, the initial reaction of, is my business going to be able to stay open? Think about what payroll does. We ensure that our clients and their employees are paid on time, correctly, every time. And to have those words come from the governor saying, pause and close down and work remotely, I'll be honest, fear came to my mind, panic came to me, and I was never so relieved when the governor determined that payroll was indeed essential. And then our immediate next step was, how do we keep our people safe? We have clients that come and pick up their paychecks daily from us. So it's keeping our environment safe, establishing a new workflow of who can come into our building, who cannot. And in essence, only employees are now allowed in our space. And then pivoting to the knowledge end and the ever-changing information, like Rose had just explained, that was changing by the second as far as new legislation that was passing. It wasn't even passed and the phones were ringing off the hook, to the point where we didn't have enough, we run 6 phone lines here in our organization and they're all lit up all at once, all day long, with clients saying, what do I do? How do I handle this? And fortunately, we were able to evolve with it and gain the knowledge to help guide our clients through this. On the personal side, like Rose, I'm a social animal. I love being out in the field and meeting with the clients. So scaling back and working completely out of my office without being face-to-face with clients was a huge challenge. And then with small children, of juggling that aspect of, all right, what do we do with them, with school, and the whole personal end of the environment, plus my staff and how it affects them, and the fear, and putting them at ease that we're going to keep everyone safe and we're going to follow the protocols that we can, and together we're going to get through this.
And we will, Jeannine, we will get through it for sure.
It's been a challenge, but makes us stronger.
Absolutely. I think based on what we're all saying, I'm sure that the people that are listening, as well as anyone who's not listening, probably is going through some similar things with their businesses. But I can tell you that from my perspective, the people, my clients that are calling or that have been calling, especially in the beginning, they were impacted greatly with the furlough versus the layoff situation. I mean, that was probably one of our number one calls and answers. And I think it was difficult for people to A, try to figure out what the differences were, and B, just in the fact that they had to do this, and what were the implications from that. So what I, had told my clients, and then I'll let Rose piggyback on this because you're the expert, in the human resources area. But what I told my clients was that basically, the difference between layoffs and furloughs basically means, one, if you're laying them off, they no longer work there. They're sort of severed from the company. And if they're furloughed, what I would tell my clients is that the intention is that they still work there. You can still get your, in my case, people were asking so much about the benefits. So with the furlough, I was telling them, you can continue on, with the person having benefits through your company, even though they're technically furloughed. So Rose, is that accurate, pretty accurate information, or what can you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. A furlough would be what we term as a approved unpaid leave. So their hours or eligibility don't change, because the assumption is that they're just on an unpaid leave of absence during a furlough, where, as you said, a layoff is a separation of employment. They become inactive, where you can, on a furlough, keep them as an active employee on their payroll. So
and we would tell them no health insurance for the layoff. Is that correct?
Correct. When you would go through a termination process with a layoff, with the hopes that you may call them back, but what we see as the missing link in all of this is proper documentation. Employers really need to document what they've done and communicate clearly to the employee whether they're laid off, which is a separation of employment, or a furlough where they are still active on the payroll. So, and you need to clearly make that differentiation. What we've also seen from the client base is that we've had 3 very distinct scenarios, and each one had a lot of HR employee implications. So you have the company that's shut down, and they are faced with who they can afford to stay active, who can they furlough, and do they have to lay them off because we have no revenues. But then you had the ones that could transfer to remote working, so they could keep people on the payroll and have work for them to do, transfer it onto the workplace at home, but may modify their hours. So that can have a situation that could impact the benefits, because if they're not working enough hours, become a part-timer instead of full-timer. So, and it takes a different type of management when you have remote workers. And then the last category was the companies that did not slow down. They were deemed essential. And there was all kinds of businesses, not just healthcare, anything to do with infrastructure, utilities, construction that related to safety were deemed essential. So now you have a situation with people that are frightened because this was at the height of the pandemic that they've had to work, and all the protocols that you had to put into place, all the disinfecting protocols, the social distancing that's been from day one for those individuals. And they may be actually experience an increase. I know a lot of the technology firms, because we're all on Zoom, we all have to have our employees have, I talked to one technology company that had one day's order was to get 120 laptops.
Mm.
And then they were experiencing a shortage in getting those laptops. So it has, each category had a very significant employee issues that you had to deal with, along with all the different forms of leave and the assistance that the government had been giving employees to be out of work or have reasons to need leave that are COVID related, those rules. And the employer each time had a responsibility to communicate those to their employees clearly. So the burden on employers has been so full, and a long list for them to keep up on.
Absolutely. Jeannine, did the furlough versus the layoff situation impact you in your office? Did you get, calls on that? And, is there anything with payroll that has specifically to, implications either way?
We had a number of clients call and look for guidance. In every client's situation, they would call looking for help. What do I do? I want to keep my people, but I can't afford to pay them, was a common concern for them. As a payroll provider, my recommendation would be you need to call an HR professional like Rose for guidance. But we had many clients. Fortunately, they've been able to work through it, and we are seeing them all come back.
Yeah, thank goodness.
On the positive side, we are seeing the businesses working through this challenge.
Yeah, thank goodness. And I think when people called me on what you just mentioned, because we got those calls too, saying, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any money coming in, and how am I supposed to pay my employees and all of that. And so there was always a lot of conversation about furlough, about layoffs if you had to, and certainly explaining the whole situation where the $600 extra that they got on on the unemployment side, or the PPP money if they were eligible to apply for that. But it was tough. It was tough for a lot of people. So you
Right.
got a lot of calls about the PPP, Rose, I assume too.
Oh yes, so many, and me included. I, as a small business owner, I'm applying for it too. That turned out to be a very big relief. What I hear across the board, and for myself personally, for my company, it was a definite relief in a way that you could keep your core people, the ones that still had to work you could keep them at full wages. You know, good people are hard to find, and you want to have a way to be able to afford them. And the PPP was a very nice way for employers to keep paying those wages, whether they had full work or not. A lot of employers wished it was longer. You know, they're still really concerned about once the money ends, once you've exhausted your loan, things still might not improve. And what do you do for the rest of the term that this is happening until we find either a treatment or a vaccine, which will be the only two ways that we can finally feel like, you know, things could go back to the new normal. But it has been a big help. And many, I find too, clients were very generous. Many they dug into their pockets and helped employees for at least a couple of weeks initially. So, you know, a lot of good employers out there that tried to keep it going, even though plummeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I too got the PPP money, and it really helped us, you know, to stay afloat. So we were certainly happy with that. And I think getting it helped me to be able to talk to people easier about it when they called us, you know, with questions on it. Of course, all the banks were different. So, you know, we were guiding them as best we could to tell them, you know, contact your bank. This is what my bank is doing. But many people did call back and say, yeah, my bank's not doing that. So it was a little bit crazy of a time. And I have heard, Jeannine, have you heard that June 30th is still the last day that somebody can apply for the PPP money?
From some of my last communication with the local bankers, the 30th is, we have not heard it being extended, but some of the local banks still have funds available to lend. So if a business would still like to evaluate if they can qualify for PPP monies, talk to some of the local, you know, and I don't want to say smaller banks, but those smaller local community banks tend to be the ones that I hear that still have the funds available.
Yeah.
Right, and they made some nice changes. They went from 8-week forgivable term to 24 weeks of forgivable, made it a little easier to spread out those funds and calculate. And they also made the difference between.
Oh, you got your credit card, the spiral, because you'll. Yeah, I'll just use that. Thank you.
The difference between the. There's so much, there was a portion, 75% needed to be payroll, and only 25% they made at 60-40. So that made it a little easier to spend the money and have it forgiven. It didn't have to just be payroll, because there's other costs than payroll. Even 401k match is different than payroll.
Right.
But rent was a big one, that many people needed the money to pay for their rents. So that's
me about a car, Rose. Did you hear anything about that? That was the one question that I had a couple of times, that people were saying, well, what about my car payment? I was like, geez, I have not heard anything about that. Did you?
No, not on the list.
Wasn't on the list. Okay. Good to know. I should have called you sooner. Yeah, they didn't really tell us that the money was going to be extended, or at least I didn't hear from my bank that the money was extended. We were on the 7th week when I heard something about it. So, I mean,
Right.
it's still good, you know, but it would have been nice to know it a little ahead of time. So
it's outlined by the small business, the SBA. You can go to that website and the SBA, and they update it. And just like everything else that we've been mentioning, it's been fast and furious changes. So you can't like read it 3 weeks ago and think. You have to read it continually and update it continually.
So everybody should either go to sba.gov or they should call Rose Miller, because you're reading it every day. You can tell them anything they need to know, I'm sure. So, you know, I mean, the SBA is a really good, you know,
I hate that.
place to go.
I hate that.
Is somebody hearing that, or just me?
Yeah,
Somebody?
Lauren needs to mute.
Lauren
Thing needs to mute.
I tried to
Um,
write her. I did try to write her, but yeah, if everyone's here and they came late, just try to mute your mic as we are on meeting mode for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so another thing that happened to us in our office with a lot of calls and a lot of people calling us about and being concerned about from our side of things was what the government was doing as far as charging for, we all know the money's coming from somewhere, right? I mean, a lot of people are, a lot of people have this tendency to think this is all free money. It's free money, but it's coming from somewhere. So, I tend to tell people just watch out. It's probably going to come out in our taxes eventually. And for us, this is sort of held true because from the health insurance side, you probably all know that all of the costs that normally would be associated with utilizing your health insurance plan, whether it be deductibles or co-pays, were all waived during the COVID, the great COVID crisis, and still is being waived now for COVID related services. So if somebody was getting testing, that's free. If somebody, God forbid, did get the COVID, all of their services, in the hospital. I happen to know somebody who was in the hospital 63 days. All of those services, had to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, it's a fortune to be in the hospital.
Yes,
63
yes.
days.
And employers right now need to budget for things that we didn't normally budget.
Right.
PPE, we have to supply the masks. And in some areas, we have to supply more than just masks. We have to, we had to increase all our hygiene protocols. Your cleaning company may not be doing what's required, and it's up to you to make sure. So there's all a cost to that.
Right.
Keeping your place, what I term Corona clean, has been an added expense.
Right.
So,
absolutely. Well, we already got word on the health insurance side that the rates are, increasing, starting for fourth quarter and first quarter. Probably not so much for fourth quarter because those rates are kind of already been in place for the most part. I think they're just increasing them slightly, but, first quarter, we're looking at, maybe double-digit increases again, and we've kind of got away from that for the most part for the last couple of years.
Yep.
So I'm putting it out there to people that to make them understand, again, the money has to come from somewhere. It might be free initially, but it's coming out of someplace,
And absolutely, and correct me because this is your area, but what we're hearing is that employers should, because Workers' Comp Board has allowed the positive cases, if there is a direct correlation to the workplace, viruses are normally, prior to COVID, were not a criteria for the OSHA 300 reporting, for a workers' comp first reported injury. But if they're in a situation where they're like a healthcare provider, or an EMS, provider, there is a correlation, and you have to now report it. That's going to impact the workers' comp. There also is, I get a lot of questions about liability, because how liable are you if you have a case? And so we're sending everyone to the brokers to get employers' practices liability insurance. If it's a fairly inexpensive insurance, and everyone should have that right now, because if you do have a case against you, you would have that. So are you seeing that an increase in both of those too?
I am, and we are doing the same thing with kind of, we don't want to feel like we're telling our clients to buy something else. We don't consider ourselves a sales agency. We want to show them what we have available to them, and if it's something that they want, we want them to be able to know they can get it from us. But at the same time, when you have all of this new stuff going on, we feel a responsibility that we're going to have to start telling people about these insurances that are available as opposed to waiting for them to call us and ask us about it. So yes, we have heard the same thing though about the workman's comp. We don't do workman's comp. We would, push that over to Jeannine and her group to look at through payroll, but we are telling people, because we've had a couple people in our world, in our client world, that have called us to say, we've got our first case of COVID, oh my God, and, we're talking about that. And unfortunately, one of the things we have to bring up is, is everyone working remotely? Is everybody, do you have people still working in the office? Because if you do, obviously that could create a whole workman's comp case for the rest of the people that are in that office if someone gets it. What are you telling people, Jeannine, as far as that goes?
We're asking them to speak with their broker and their carrier in regards to if something is subject to their workers' comp. If they have a claim. Unfortunately, I can't make any kind of determination on that as a payroll service provider.
Right. Yeah, nor can I, but we can just guide them, to the insurances that would cover these things that we're talking about. And then as far as the workman's comp goes, they'd have to call their workman's comp carrier, and that's what we would tell them on that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's affecting our clients in just so many different ways. It's hard to keep up with all the things. From our business, we also, what's changed in our industry is, I'm sure you've got some industry things to talk about too. One of the big things from the health insurance world is telemedicine. Telemedicine is something that I've been talking about for a decade. I've been going to my clients saying, hey, you won't believe this great thing that's out, it's called telemedicine. You call a doctor first. You no longer have to sit in an emergency room. You no longer have to sit in a doctor's office. Yeah, it's awesome. And
it really is the best.
10 years ago, literally a decade ago, I started talking to my clients about it. And for for like 7 years, I would just go back and back and back to the same client and say, yeah, well, remember telemedicine? They're like, no, it sounds good. But, my people like to go to the doctors. They want to see a doctor that they know. And you know what? My response to them is, your doctor doesn't know you. We're far beyond the days where, you sat in the doctor's office and they know everything about you because they had your mother and your grandmother. And, we had one of those doctors, my family doctor, it was Dr. Percelli. And Dr. Percelli was my mother's doctor. And I think he was, I don't know if it was her mother's doctor, but certainly all her sisters and brothers went to him. And then of course we went to Dr. Percelli, and he, was this little older kind of man who knew us and, liked us. And we felt like he was like part of the family. That's great. Well, when Dr. Percelli was getting ready to retire, I think he sold a Seton or something like everybody else does. And now you just went, you went to the same place and you just saw the doctor who was there, to handle it. So after a while, those doctors, they're just grabbing your chart on the way in the door. They don't really know who you are. My own doctor, who I've gone to for, 30 years, my gynecologist, still comes in and asks me the same question every year. She's grabbing my file on the way in and, hey, how's it going? She calls me Carm for Carmela. How's it going, Carm? And then, so, what's been going on? She doesn't really know, and just by the way she's talking, they don't know you anymore like they used to. So telemedicine is awesome because yes, they don't know you and you are going to get the next doctor who answers the phone. However, they've got your chart in front of you, just like any other doctor who's going to grab it. And the beauty of it is that you don't have to take your sick kid out to a doctor's office. You don't have to sit in the emergency room. And, if you've got a sinus infection, do you really want to go sit in the middle of a doctor's office that's got flu people in there, or in this case today, COVID? So it's taken off like wildfire. Like all of a sudden people are like, me about it, like it's something new. And I constantly keep saying, it's not new. You've had it forever, but it's nice that it's finally coming around. But I think that this is just a good point also of all of the changes that are coming our way. People hate change. I don't care what we're talking about. People don't want to change what they do. Every time I'm annoyed every time my cell phone has an upgrade, right? I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to use my cell phone anymore. Well, people are like that for everything. And with this, something like telemedicine, the change is so drastic. It forced us to use something that's been available to us for a long time. And guess what? Once people start using it, they kind of like it. And so that's just one of the many changes that are happening out there, working remotely. Some people like Rose, had remote workers. We didn't. I was kind of one of those people that didn't really want that. But it's worked out okay. It's not, it's different than I thought.
And Candy, you bring a good point with change, because change can be a real stressor. And one thing that employers need to realize, understand, and I'm sure many do, we're all going through a very stressful time. This entire ordeal has had a major impact. Proof of that is we get this data all the time. Incidences of domestic abuse, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and mental illness has risen during this time. Those are all side effects of people under stress. Now that makes it really difficult for an employer, because they may feel, they need to be flexible, yet on the conversely, you still have to run your business, and sometimes you have to make hard choices, and you can't always lead with your heart, even though you recognize you do need to be flexible and understanding. At the same time, when it comes to employment practices, no good deed goes unpunished. You think you're doing the right thing, you think you're being kind and nice, and then it turns around and works against you as an employer. So employers have a very difficult role of understanding what they have to do to run a business and the decisions they have to make, and at the same time understanding this is unprecedented times for all of us, and everyone is very stressed. So leaning on, organizations that deal with those different avenues may be helpful to go to. And just having a mechanism for people to, that's why we stress having HR, because HR is what I call as the little valve on the pressure cooker. And if you don't have the valve, your pressure cooker will explode. But if you have some place to go, so you need some mechanism where people could just express their fears and anxieties. They just need an avenue, a safe avenue. And you could be the best boss in the world, you're still the boss, and I'm not going to tell you my problems. So you need a mechanism, some place safe that they can go to and just have a conversation.
Well said, Rose. And I hope people pick up on the fact that that's what we're all here for. You can only run your business as good as you can run your business. You can, and you run your business well as far as what you do, but you need people, that do this inside every day, inside and out, to be able to help you with the things that you're not ever going to know. Some things trickle down to us, but really you got to work with people who do this day in and day out. Speaking of which, I see the time is ticking away, and I know at 1:45 or I'm sorry, 2:45, we said we were going to, bring some questions in. But before we get to that, I just wanted to make sure, I know there's some new things on the horizon that some businesses don't know about, some forms and some procedures and things like that on both of your ends. I just want to get to that before we run out of time. So Jeannine, let's start with you. The things that you can talk about that, would be good information for an employer to know that they might not know, something that may have changed, since COVID coming back.
So employers need to know that when they lay off employees and bring them back, it is important that they treat that employee as a new hire and make sure that they're completing all of the appropriate paperwork. And that includes W-4 forms, I-9 forms, and notice of pay rate forms. And we can certainly share with the group. The 2020 W-4 form is going to look significantly different than any year prior with the tax legislation changes that occurred for this year. So that's, I think, one of the most important pieces when you bring an employee back, is that you have the proper documentation for their employee files from a payroll perspective. And then to ensuring that they're being paid correctly, work with your either HR department or HR contact at Pinnacle, and certainly on the benefit side, to make sure that the deductions are set up properly. Did anything change? And Rose will stem more on that, I'm sure, as she talks through her rehire process. But it's making sure that those employees are paid correctly and on time. And for those employers who have opted not for technology and change, direct deposit is a beautiful thing. Believe it or not, there are many employers out there that still do not offer direct deposit. That paper check and going to the bank. Use
Right.
direct.
I like getting
Right.
really early.
What's the one less thing you have to handle?
Right.
It's amazing, even during this time, those that have to pick up their checks, handwrite checks, direct deposit is trackable, traceable, easy, and all part of what your payroll provider should be doing for you.
Absolutely. So Rose, tell us about all of the things on the HR side. I know I've heard you talk a couple of times about things that I was unaware of. So I'm sure that, there's probably people listening in that are probably unaware of some of the things that are going to change.
Yes, well, I like the title that we gave this about reflection and because it is, right, and recovery, because it is a good time to step back and take this as an opportunity, especially when you're calling people back, because if you've been complaining for years about Harry and Mary, okay, you may want not to call them back. This is your opportunity. So you have no one to blame but yourself if you call them back.
That's right.
So you can decide how you want to structure it can be a new opportunity. See who you need, who is the best employees, bring them on. You do have to think about social distancing and whether they can all be in the same place at the same time. There are so many things you have to consider because you are really onboarding all of these. As Jeannine said, you are onboarding. Everyone needs a wage notice again. You have to do all your new hire process. If you are changing comps or schedules, or that may impact their ability to be exempt. It may impact their ability to have insurance if there's so many hours attached to eligibility. So what we've done as a firm and we're making available is we prepared a return checklist for employers to follow. And so you're not missing all the various things you have to consider when they're returning back to work. But you also have these new protocols, you have new policies, you have new poster requirements. So all of that is your responsibility. And hot off the presses is this morning, what the team and I have working on is contacting every single one of our clients, and we've made a template because we have starting midnight last night, we have the governors of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey with travel advisory. This is the time of year where everyone is planning their vacations. And if they are traveling to the states that are listed in that advisory, they are required to have a 14-day quarantine before they can return to work. So your employees need this memo and to say, so this just is today.
Yeah.
This wasn't yesterday. So this is a good example of how you really have to have someone in your corner always advising you, because we see many employers that haven't even posted and informed people about family first COVID Act, and that's very complex to administer. There's 6 criteria, and you hear things from all kinds of things from employees, and they may or may not meet the criteria. Just being frightened isn't on the list.
Right.
But you do have to ask, why are you frightened? Because one of the reasons that they may be frightened might be on the list. So, and you can't, as an employer, react on anything other than a healthcare practitioner's certification. So there is just so much to do and consider when you're bringing back people and restoring and reopening.
And when you say bringing back, Rose, you mean bringing back from layoff, right? So if somebody was furloughed per se, they're still technically considered on. So they wouldn't have to do all of those forms all over again, right?
Right. So there's a whole list of things, you know, like the hiring would only, rehiring people would be impact those people that were either terminated or laid off, and you determine who comes back. But there is a whole host of new things that employer has to do. Then they're reopening their offices and they're going back on site. They may not continue to work at home, because work from home, many were finding I may continue doing that, but there was a whole host of employers where that's not going to work. It was a temporary thing and they lived with it, but it's not conducive to getting the job done. So they have to have them come back into their offices or work sites. You know, my team doesn't come to my office, they go on work sites. And many professional services, if you think of architects, engineers, CPAs, they go on site to a client. So you have to, there's all those things to consider, all in the trying to stop the spread and keeping people safe, because the virus is still there. We've done an amazing job in the state of New York to get on the other side of the curve. It's because everyone's doing the right thing. It's not that it went away. It's because we were doing the right things. It is alive and well, as we're seeing from parts of the country that aren't doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I think that we could, you know, probably spend another 2 hours talking about COVID and all the things that it's affected us and everyone else. So, you know, I hope that some of this was, you know, helpful to some people that are on the listening end. And I think, Rose, you said you would get together those forms that employers would need should they be putting someone back on, and we'll, you know, either have people can contact you and, you know, request those forms or something else. But I think maybe we'll try to send those out with the thank yous to everyone who attended, if that's okay. And then, Jason, did we have any questions while we were chatting?
There is one for Jeannine, and the question, I believe you guys are speaking about Family First, and the question, credit for Family First leaves. Was that answered, or?
That has not been answered, and that's an excellent question. So the Family First paid leave is a criteria. So the employees have to have, and Rose, jump in here and help me for a second. They have to have criteria that meets those 6 items to qualify for that Family First credit. And that tax credit then is used to offset the federal tax withholding dollars on the payroll tax return for employers. If anyone has employees that are subject to that, they need to talk to their payroll provider, because that information needs to be coded correctly at the time of payroll, so that those credits can be applied on the 941 and those tax deposits.
And so, just because I'm not on that side of the fence, just so it's clear to me, what you're saying is, if I had someone that worked for me who qualified to be on leave for a reason deemed under the COVID list, if you will, then let's say it's a 2-week, I know there's a couple of different couple of different leaves depending on what the situation is, but let's say it's the leave where I can get 2 weeks, right? So then my employee would take 2 weeks off, and then there would be forms or things that they would have to fill out, and certainly something through payroll that would have to be noted. And then are you saying that I would pay my employees, but I would get some sort of a reimbursement from the government for those 2 weeks? Is that what we're saying?
That's
No.
correct. So for, the wages paid for those employees for the Families First coronavirus you would be reimbursed via
Gotcha.
tax credits.
Gotcha. That's important information, I think, for everybody to know, because I think that was one of the things that was out there that employers were saying, well, you know, if they take 2 weeks off, you know, I'm supposed to pay them for those 2 weeks and maybe still have to, you know, fill their job in with a temp or something like that. So I think it's good information to know that that there is reimbursement, but that they would have to make sure that, you know, that the payroll company they're working with is going to, you know, understands that's what it is, so that they can code that correctly, right?
With all of these items, from benefits to HR to payroll, communication is key with the clients, communicating with their partners so that they can be guided correctly to implement these programs. Because if those wages are paid and they're not reported or coded correctly, you're going to have a whole nother ripple effect of getting that corrected to get that reimbursement.
I imagine getting money back from the government would not be as easy as you would think. Imagine that.
No,
It's,
that's
it's the
correct.
best government.
Any other questions, Jason?
We speak about employees and requirements, and so I guess it's a two-parter: how the company's dealing with all the return to work requirements, and what are some of the ways the companies are meeting the testing requirements.
I think that's a Rose question. What do you think?
It is. So there's some wonderful tools that the governor's website, COVID website, has for employers. When you're returning back to work, there's, you know, you are supposed to have a plan. There's a tool to kind of walk you through the plan. There's also on forwardnewyork.gov is a return to work tool that you can put your county and your industry code, and it will list what phase you're in, and it will also click to all your requirements that you need to do to return back to work. So that is a really great way, because it's updated constantly, to know what your requirements are. Every employer is to supply masks. Masks are a requirement for not only your employees coming into the office, but even your visitors. So that is to stop the spread. What we're seeing is that we have misinformation out there, and that's causing some employees to refuse wear masks, or even visitors. There's one client I have that has a retail operation that is able to open, and had a very irate and angry, to the point where he really had to call the police, saying he didn't, you know, he was not allowed in because he refused to wear a mask. So there's a lot of that going on. It makes it even more difficult. But you do have, what the good news is, you are able to, there's all kinds of testing protocols and testing requirements to test every day your employees for temperature, symptoms, and what exposures have they had to people testing positive. Doing it physically is not an answer for a lot of companies, because you have to do social distance. So you can imagine with social distancing, if you had 75 employees, how long would that take every morning? It's not doable, it's not scalable. So the good news is there's electronic ways to do this testing. So I know I'm working with a company right now that is developing an app, and I'm very excited about it, because the app would email all employees with their questions every day, and they have to certify that the answers are correct and honest. And that gives you liability, some protection if they've said something that it wasn't correct. They've attested that it was. So you have documentation. You need to have documentation. You need to have that documentation securely done and put in a secure place. It follows the same requirements in security as any other health information you get, not anything more. There's been a lot of questions about that, but you always had to keep, medical information in a separate file under lock and key. Same thing with your testing results. We provide guidance on what happens if an employee is positive, because there's all kinds of mandated steps that an employer has to take. You want to make sure you're doing the criteria, because we're getting telephone calls, because my company represents the employer. We try to keep the employer protected, doing the right thing, so we mitigate the risks. We're hearing from employees. We're getting calls from employees. It's not a good sign. My employer is not doing the right cleaning. My employer is not requiring us to wear masks. This is a big exposure for employers. So, because your employees want to stay safe, and if you're not doing the right things, they're going to turn you in. And there's fines and penalties, by the way, for employers not doing the right thing. So,
if somebody tells their employer that they have a fever, we'll say, for example, would the employer then tell them to go get tested? I mean, what is the protocol for that?
Right, correct. They either get tested or they just seek a healthcare practitioner and get a diagnosis.
And then stay home for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But you are not to allow them in. You send them home and say you need to either be tested, and unless we get a healthcare practitioner saying that, because we have to remember people have illnesses and injuries outside of COVID, right? They could have a sinus infection. They can have, so as long as it's not COVID, that's why you need to always make sure that you're reacting on the healthcare practitioners.
Boy, there's an awful lot for people to know, that's for sure. And I hope that, I hope that some people that are on here, got some good information from us and maybe something they didn't know. And again, the point of me having this was more or less just to reach out, have an olive branch to people so they knew that there's people here that they can contact. Half the battle is just knowing who to call, right? So you have a question. Like I said, we get a lot of calls from our clients because they trust us and they know us, but they're asking us things that we don't know about. And, it's better for me to refer them to somebody. If somebody has a payroll question, I'm going to tell them to call Jeannine. If somebody has an HR question, I'm going to have them call Rose. So, it's better to do that than it is for me to try to guess. There's just too many questions and too many things that are changing on a daily basis for us all to keep up with. So, I know we promised 1 hour and it's been just about an hour, right, Jason?
Yes,
so
it was perfect.
Or we're going to send out the answer to any questions. I think we'll send out all of the questions that we got with all of the answers. We only got to a couple questions, but we will get all of the answers out to everyone that attended today, as well as sending any paperwork that we can send, like those forms that Rose was talking about. So we'll get you everything that we can. If you ever have any questions on payroll, health insurance, or human resources, we would love to hear from you, and stay tuned. I'm sure we'll have some more of these meetings soon.